healthcare in a nice way. And this figure goes as high as 400 million. We have 2 billion people in the world who cannot access medicine that they need. 2 million people die every year in this era of and this century because of diseases that we can actually treat and prevent, such as TB as well as malaria. And unfortunately, if you can see that the cost of healthcare has doubled since 2000 and since 2000, and it's now reaching to 6.5 trillion. Now, one of the reasons for this massive expansion in the cost of healthcare is actually the high cost of effective but yet expensive medications that we have, out of which we have, of course, the biological treatments. Now, we have had the biologics for almost 2 decades plus few years so far. Unfortunately, until today, we have 50% of RA patients only receive biologics. So we have 50% of patients who are in need for biological treatment. They do not receive biological treatment because of the high cost of the medicine. And if you look at the 7 major markets in the world, in Europe and North America, East Asia, you can see that approximately 50% of patients with severe RA, they do not yet receive biological treatments that they need. Now, to have a solution for that, there was the introduction of biosimilars earlier in the past decade. So what is basically a biosimilar? Biosimilar is a product that is highly similar to the reference biological medication in terms of quality, safety, and efficacy data. So it's basically another version of the biomolecule. This was well, recognized by the European, Drug Agency, as well as by the Food and Drug Authority. And since then, biosimilars have, taken their position across the major management guidelines for different autoimmune inflammatory conditions, be it in rheumatology, gastroenterology, dermatology, as well as ophthalmology. Now, I would like to draw your attention to this, cartoon. So just bear with me. If we have a company that is producing, for example, adalimumab. So if this company produced adalimumab, for example, in 2021, so the batch that was produced in 2021 will constitute peptide molecules that are arranged in a sequence, and then to these peptide molecules comes the attachment of what we call the amino acid chains. So if you look at batch 1, this was, for example, the batch that was produced by the manufacturing company in 2021, for example. Now, in 2022, the same company produced the same medicine, which contains the same, chemical as well as the structural characteristics. However, there is, changes in the arrangement of these peptide molecules, as well as the amino acid sequence that is actually attaching to it. The same thing applies to batch 3, where we have, again, the same company that manufactured the same biological medicine with the same structure and chemical components. However, again, the arrangement of the molecules are different from those manufactured in 2022 and 2021, and the attachment of the amino acid sequence is also different. Now, if you look into that and try to compare this to the biosimilar structure, you will see that biosimilar is basically very similar to the reference medicine. It's not identical, but it's very similar to the reference medicine in a way that it contains the same peptide molecules that are contained in the originator or the reference molecule. However, the arrangements are slightly different. Plus, of course, number 2, the attachment of the amino acid sequence is different. So this is a very important concept that we have to put in the back of our heads when we are considering, the similarities between the biosimilar as well as the originator, in a way that they're not identical, but they're similar. Even the originator molecules, they're similar, but they're not identical. Now, when we talk about the development approach of any medicine, if you look at the light blue triangle, you will notice that the development of any medicine starts from the analytical phase, so the bottom, part of the light triangle. Then it moves on to the preclinical studies, then the studies that consider, assessing the pharmacokinetics as well as the pharmacodynamics. And then we tend to see like the clinical studies that can show the clinical effect of the medicine. In the world of biosimilars, this triangle turns upside down. So now if you look at the darker, triangle, you will see that it is actually the opposite, because we know that the originator as well as, or the reference, and the biosimilar medicines are same in the clinical, in the chemical structure as well as in the characteristics. So we know that this medicine will be, clinically as similar as the originator medicine. So our aim is to determine the similarities when it comes to the pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics, as well as the preclinical, as well as the analytical assessment of the development approaches for these medicines. So having said that, when we talk about the affinity, so affinity basically in Arabic is al-jadhibiyya. So for example, if we're having a medication that is an anti-TNF medicine, so we're actually talking about the affinity of this anti-TNF medicine to be able to attach itself to the TNF molecule. So when the binding affinity of the originator compared to the biosimilar were compared together, you will see that there is high degree of similarity in the target, binding affinity. And of course, I was talking earlier about the structure of the molecule when we have like the peptide molecules as well as the amino acid, sequence chains that are attached to these peptide molecules. And if you see that, there are no differences in the mapping between the reference medicine compared to the biosimilar medication. Now let's move on to some real-world data. So we have the Dan Bioregistry, and then I'll present the results from the Noor Specialist Hospital. So this is a study in which they recruited patients from the Dan Bioregistry, which is a registry that recruited patients in the from Danish, from Denmark. And patients who were recruited in this registry were patients with rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, axial spondyloarthritis, who are receiving treatment with different biological medications. So they took patients who were treated with adalimumab, or reference adalimumab, by the 1st of November 2018. And then they divided these patients into 3 groups. So the first group was like the switcher group, which means that patients who were receiving the reference adalimumab were switched completely to the biosimilar adalimumab. The second group was the non-switchers, which means that patients who were receiving the reference adalimumab, they continued to be treated with the reference adalimumab. The third patient, they were like the back switchers. So patients who were receiving the biosimilar adalimumab, they were actually put back on the reference adalimumab. What they were trying to assess, the primary endpoint, which was the comparison between the biosimilar adalimumab of a Sandoz company and another company, and they were comparing it with the reference adalimumab in terms of efficacy as well as safety. And when we talk about efficacy, we talk about retention rate, we talk about persistence, and when we talk about safety, we talk about the side effects. So what was noted that remission rates were like as high as 89%, which is really considered a high, retention rate in patients with receiving like any medicine. And the remission rate was not, changed over like 6 months. Changes in the activity like pre-switch and post-switch were like negligible, so there was like none clinically significant. And of course, there were definitely patients who were withdrawn from this medicine, and the reason was like loss of efficacy as well as some adverse events. And there was low back switching from the originator to the biosimilar. Now, let me walk you through the data that we have so far at the Noor Specialist Hospital. So we have, for those who are, not familiar with this hospital, so this is a tertiary care governmental hospital that is located in Mecca. It's like 3.5 kilometers from the Al-Haram al-Makki al-Sharif. Sandoz adalimumab was introduced in January 2022. Currently, we have more than 250 patients who are on treatment with Sandoz adalimumab with different indications, rheumatological, gastrointestinal, as well as dermatological indications. All biologic naive patients who require adalimumab are now put on Sandoz adalimumab for the indications that I have just mentioned a while ago. We practice what we call a guided switch for all patients from adalimumab reference to adalimumab biosimilar. What we mean by the guided switch is that we actually inject the first dose of Sandoz biosimilar in the clinic by a clinical pharmacist. Patient goes and bring the medicine. By the time the patient comes back from the pharmacy, the medicine is almost like room temperature. We try to cool down the area or freeze the area where the patient will be receiving the injection. We sterilize it, and then we put the injection, and we apply again, icing after that. Because of that, I'll show you the effect of this guided switch that we're having and practicing in our center. And of course, we measure disease as well as patient-reported outcomes every 3 to 4 months, and we try to assess drug retention, switch escalation, as well as adverse reactions. And of course, our hospital administration is also looking into the cost effectiveness and the financial impact. So far, we have approximately 46 patients who are receiving adalimumab Sandoz for rheumatological indications. For the purpose of this meeting, I'm going to present preliminary result of 80 patients, out of which we have 42 patients with rheumatoid arthritis, 13 patients with axial spondyloarthritis, 9 patients with psoriatic arthritis, and 16 patients with others, mainly Behçet disease. Now, out of these 80, we have 32 patients who were biologic naive, which means that they were not receiving any biological treatment before starting adalimumab Sandoz. And we had 48 patients who were biological switch, which means that they were either receiving adalimumab reference adalimumab, or they were receiving another biologic treatment, either of a TNF inhibition family or of a different mechanism of action. The drug retention rate that we have had over so far for more than 1 year is approximately 80%, which is really reassuring. Out of these 80 patients, we have 18 patients who stopped adalimumab Sandoz, 9 of them because of loss of efficacy, and they were mainly or secondary failure. And we were yesterday actually talking about the cycling as well as switching. So all of them were actually cycling, which means that they were exposed to a previous TNF alpha inhibitor. Now, injection site reaction was noted in 2 patients only, and I think this is really reassuring for us. And I really encourage our colleagues to practice the guided switch and try to put or inject the patient with the first injection in the clinic. And then, of course, 5 patients unfortunately had infection, 3 of which were pneumonia, 1 gastroenteritis, and 1 otitis. Self-discontinued, we had 2 patients who self-discontinued. Now, I'll walk you quickly through the data that are with regards to the rheumatoid arthritis. 1 minute, I'll finish. So we had 42 patients with rheumatoid arthritis, and if you look at the 2 bottom, lines in the table, or rows in the table, you will see that DAS 28 CRP at start was 4.5 in these patients, and after 1 year, DAS 28 CRP has gone down to 1.7. With regards to patients with axial spondyloarthritis, we had 13 patients with axial spondyloarthritis. Now, if you look at the AS-DAS CRP at start, it was 4.1. That was indicative of severely active disease. So for those who were still on adalimumab, Sandoz adalimumab, you can see that AS-DAS CRP has gone down to 1.4, which means that low disease activity. And the same thing applies for BAS-DAI, where we started about a score of 5.1 at start. This score has gone down to 2.3 after 1 year in patients who are still on adalimumab Sandoz. The last, group of patients were patients with psoriatic arthritis, and we're actually measuring and assessing both disease activity measures such as DAPSA as well as PASI. So to start with, we had DAPSA scores as high as 27. After 1 year of being on, adalimumab Sandoz, this score has gone down to 4.2, which is indicative of like remission in patients with psoriatic arthritis. With respect to skin assessment of these patients with psoriatic arthritis, we started a PASI score with a PASI score of 8.3, and now, alhamdulillah, we're seeing a PASI score that is, 1.6, which again it represents a remission when it comes to skin activity in patients with psoriatic arthritis. So the last slide, to summarize, I would say that biosimilars offer major cost saving and may increase patients' access. Preliminary data from Noor Specialist Hospital in biologic naive RA, axial spondyloarthritis, and patients with psoriatic arthritis demonstrate high efficacy as well as safety of Sandoz adalimumab. Further work is ongoing to assess comparability to reference adalimumab. Real-world evidence supports the efficacy and safety of switching from reference adalimumab to an adalimumab biosimilar. Before I finish, I really encourage colleagues from different hospitals, from different sectors, to join us and help us with your data. Let's bring Saudi or national data on the safety as well as efficacy of biosimilars in patients with our rheumatic diseases. I'll be more than happy to share the data collection sheet, and you will be author with me. Thank you very much for your kind attention and listening.